Once again, the Queen of Consorts surprises us, but not in a good way.
Made lurid and false claims about the royal family, which played on her fears and fueled paranoia.
Britain had heard royal announcements before, but nothing prepared the country for the words released under King Charles's authority that morning. The message was direct, painfully specific, and impossible to soften. Music. Camilla would no longer hold the position, privileges, or future recognition of Queen. Within minutes, palace offices fell silent. Broadcasters abandoned their schedules, and one question gripped the nation. What had happened behind closed doors to make the king destroy the future he had spent decades building for her? Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The announcement moved with ruthless speed. Charles had approved an extraordinary formal statement, a written declaration carrying the sovereign's authority, and ordered it delivered at once to senior royal households, government offices, and national broadcasters. Music. No private secretary could delay it. No courtier could soften its meaning. The central decision stood in unmistakable terms. She would cease performing duties as queen, stop using the title officially, and hold no place as queen within the monarchy's future ceremonial structure. The planned order of roles governing major state occasions. Music. Charles remained alone after signing it. His hand rested beside the pen, while an aide waited near the door, hoping for one sentence that might explain the unbearable choice. The monarch removed his glasses instead. Music. He stared at the page as though the ink had cut through decades of struggle, loyalty, scandal, and sacrifice. He had once fought to place Camilla beside him. Now he had authorized the words that would remove her. Camilla received her sealed copy at another residence moments before the country heard the news. Music. She read the decisive paragraph once, then again, searching for a limit, a temporary condition, anything that could make the blow less final. Her chair scraped backwards. She looked directly at her private secretary and asked, "Did Charles sign this himself?" The answer came quietly, but it changed her face completely. Nothing in the wording offered escape. This was not a pause caused by health, scheduling, or pressure. It was permanent. Yet another document was already traveling to Prince William. The confidential file outlined transfers involving duties, patronages, residences, music, and ceremonial authority. William opened it in silence and understood that the announcement was only the surface of a far larger royal upheaval. Britain saw a title being removed. Camilla saw a promise being broken. Charles knew the reason, and so did she. But to understand why those few sentences struck Camilla like a personal betrayal, the story must move beyond the crown and into the complicated lives of the people now standing on opposite sides of it. For Charles, the decision threatened the relationship he had defended against public anger, family resistance, and decades of painful history. For Camilla, it erased the destination she had finally reached after years of waiting. And for William, the announcement created an unbearable duty: support his father's authority while witnessing the collapse of the marriage at the center of the reign. This was no longer simply a constitutional adjustment. It was a family wound being opened before the entire world. Charles had spent years preparing Britain to accept the woman beside him. He had protected her through criticism, increased her public responsibilities, and slowly placed her closer to the center of royal life. That history made his decision almost impossible to understand. The constitutional structure, the system defining who holds authority and performs official duties, could be changed with documents, but the emotional cost could not be contained by palace language. The king called William into a private room and closed the door before speaking. He told his son that the monarchy could no longer carry a personal arrangement that had begun damaging the institution itself. The prince listened without interrupting, his hand still as the words settled between them. Charles expected relief, perhaps even agreement. Instead, he saw disappointment in the future king's face. William understood the need for order, but he also understood that his father was destroying something he had once fought the entire country to protect. Music. Camilla turned to Annabel when the formal announcement became impossible to escape. She told her sister during a private recorded conversation that the decision felt nothing like retirement. It felt like erasure. The queen consort could not understand how the man who had promised to protect her position, had become the person publicly dismantling it. Annabelle tried to calm her, but she heard the bitterness beneath every controlled sentence. Camilla had survived years of judgment to reach the throne, only to discover that the promise attached to it could still be taken away. William already knew the damage went far beyond a title. A confidential restructuring plan had transferred several duties from her household to the Prince and Princess of Wales. Patronages, ceremonial responsibilities, and public appearances were being redirected toward the next generation. The document offered him power, but it also forced him to benefit from another person's humiliation. Catherine refused to treat that transfer as a victory. In a quiet conversation, she told her husband that they could prepare for greater responsibility without celebrating Camilla's fall. She knew every new duty would carry the memory of how it had reached them. William agreed, yet neither of them spoke openly about the event that had changed Charles's mind. That incident had occurred weeks earlier, during a ceremony meant to display royal unity. And once the palace understood what had happened there, Camilla's future was already beginning to collapse. The decision did not begin with a public scandal, a newspaper campaign, or a sudden argument between husband and wife. It began inside St. George's Hall, during a private Commonwealth reception, when Camilla rejected a direct instruction from Charles in front of senior household officials. The exchange lasted less than 3 minutes. No voices were raised, yet everyone present understood that an invisible boundary had been crossed, and that the king would never forget the moment his authority was challenged. Camilla had been pushing for greater independence long before that reception. Her household wanted more control over engagements, staffing, charitable priorities, and access to major ceremonial events. The Sovereign Central Office, the team responsible for coordinating official royal decisions under the monarch's authority, had traditionally controlled those areas. Yet, she increasingly believed that carrying the title of queen meant possessing the freedom to shape her own agenda. Charles tolerated the expansion because he wanted his wife to feel secure after years of public hostility. That patience, however, came at a dangerous cost. The king began receiving private memoranda warning that 2 centers of authority were forming inside the royal household. One answered directly to him. The other appeared to move through Camilla and her advisors. At first, he treated the warnings as internal tension. Then came the Commonwealth reception, a gathering designed to strengthen relationships between the monarchy and nations connected through the Commonwealth. Her planned speech contained a commitment involving royal funding and future patronages, official links through which members of the family publicly support organizations, but Charles had never authorized it. Charles approached her before the speech and quietly instructed her to remove the promise. Camilla refused. She told him that the commitment had already been made, and reversing it would damage her credibility. Senior officials heard enough to understand the danger before leaving the room one by one. Soon only the monarch, his wife, and a senior courtier remained. Camilla folded the speech and placed it firmly on the table. She told her husband that she would not be treated like a ceremonial guest in her own reign. Charles repeated the instruction once. When she refused again, he did not shout music. He simply looked at her, picked up the speech, and walked through the side door. Silence frightened Camilla more than anger could have. She knew he had not surrendered. He had reached a decision. That evening, Charles ordered a formal review. It uncovered letters sent to organizations, unofficial promises, overlapping instructions, and future arrangements presented as settled without his approval. The correspondence showed that her advisors believed the Queen's position would protect their decisions regardless of the King's objections. Charles read the findings and summoned Camilla without advisors. No staff would stand between them this time. The answer would be delivered not through another memorandum, but across a closed table where Charles and Camilla finally said the things years of loyalty, resentment, and survival had kept buried. There were no private secretaries, no legal advisors, and no quarters to soften the language. Charles entered the room, carrying a thin red file, while Camilla was already seated beside an untouched cup of tea. He closed the door himself. For nearly an hour, the monarch and his wife confronted the truth beneath the title. Charles believed her household had challenged the crown, while Camilla believed the crown had taken everything from her except the dignity she had fought to earn. Charles placed the file between them and said the review was not about one speech. It exposed a pattern. Letters had been sent, commitments had been made, and instructions had gone out as though Camilla's authority existed separately from his own. The crown, music, the sovereign authority held by the reigning monarch, could not function through two competing centers of command. That mattered because every promise made in the royal name carried public trust, financial consequences, and the weight of the king's approval. Camilla refused to accept that her office had acted recklessly. She argued that the central household repeatedly delayed decisions, leaving charities waiting and engagements uncertain. As queen, she had been expected to appear capable, decisive, and prepared. Yet, whenever her staff tried to move quickly, Charles's officials treated them as intruders. Her voice tightened as she accused the palace of demanding leadership from her while denying her the freedom required to lead. The king opened a red file and read several lines from correspondence authorized in her name. He asked whether she had approved them. Camilla answered yes. She would not allow her advisers to absorb the blame while she protected herself behind rank. The queen consort rose from her chair and reminded him of every humiliation she had endured because he promised they would one day stand as equals. Charles set the papers down. Marriage, he told her, could offer loyalty and companionship, but the crown could never offer equality. One person carried its final authority. Camilla stared at him as the meaning settled. Then he said he had decided to separate her personal place as his wife from the constitutional and ceremonial position of queen. The official role connected to state duties, national ceremonies, and royal authority. Music, Camilla initially believed he meant fewer engagements. Charles slid a prepared document across the table. She read the first page, reached the clause, ending her official use of the title, and stopped moving. The queen consort asked whether William had demanded this. The king answered that his son had not. Music, this decision belonged to him alone. When she accused Charles of choosing the institution over her, he remained silent because denial would have been a lie. Camilla closed the file without signing the acknowledgement and walked out. Charles did not call her back. As the door closed behind Camilla, the conflict moved beyond husband and wife into the silent network of authority that could transform Charles's private decision into an unstoppable royal reality. A king may speak the words, but removing a queen from the working structure of the monarchy requires more than anger and ink. Duties must be reassigned. Households must be divided. Ceremonial language must be rewritten without creating constitutional panic. Behind the palace walls, a small group began carrying out Charles's order with extraordinary speed. Yet at the center of the machinery stood William, staring at the transfer papers, and realizing that every authority he accepted would deepen Camilla's humiliation. The Lord Chamberlain's office moved first, mapping every duty, patronage, ceremonial appearance, household appointment, and official privilege linked to her position. The office serves as the department that organizes major royal ceremonies and coordinates the working household on the sovereign's behalf. Nothing could remain unclear because one disputed engagement or unapproved promise could reopen the conflict Charles was trying to end. The change affected how the monarchy operated and appeared in public, not the line of succession, the legal order deciding who inherits the throne. So, the king retained decisive control once government officials received formal notice. William received a thick portfolio containing responsibilities, once managed through Camilla's household. He turned each page slowly, seeing ceremonies, charities, and formal appearances transferred to himself and Catherine. The prince asked his private secretary to leave. Alone, he understood the trap. Refusing the duties would weaken his father at the worst possible moment. Accepting everything without hesitation would make the future king look eager to build his authority upon another woman's fall. Catherine listened as her husband explained what the papers required. She urged him to accept only the duties needed to preserve continuity, the smooth transfer of royal work without disruption or public confusion. The Princess of Wales refused to let the change become a celebration. William agreed, yet both knew that restraint would not protect them from accusations that they had gained what Camilla had lost. Charles issued one firm instruction as the restructuring advanced. His wife would retain private security, personal dignity, and her place beside him within their marriage. However, every sovereign-facing power, authority exercised publicly in the monarch's name, would return to the central household or pass to the Wales family. A buried clause went further. Camilla's remaining office could make no promise in the crown's name without written approval. The independence that had triggered the crisis was finished. The king examined the final papers before signing them. Officials had described Camilla as the former queen. Charles crossed out the words with one deliberate stroke and replaced them with the king's wife. It was an act of mercy, but also a sentence of terrible finality. She would not be treated as an enemy. She would simply never rule beside him again. The announcement had wounded her pride, but the true cost became visible only when names vanished from schedules. Doors were reassigned, and the household Camilla had built began to dissolve around her. The first morning after the announcement did not begin with shouting. It began with absence. The briefing folder normally placed outside Camilla's sitting room never arrived. Her official diary had been cleared. Staff members who once waited for her instructions were being summoned elsewhere. As Britain debated titles and tradition, Camilla walked into her office and found 3 packed archive boxes beside the wall. A quiet message that the life she had known was already being removed. Camilla stood over the boxes without touching them. Her scheduled engagements had been suspended, while the palace separated personal promises from duties linked to her former position. The Queen's office, the staff and authority used to organize official work performed in the sovereign's name, was being dismantled around her. That mattered because charities once able to reach national networks through her title would now lose direct access to royal funding channels, coordinated publicity, and government-facing support. It also meant that decisions she had made yesterday could no longer be carried out today. The Queen Consort finally opened the nearest box and found briefing notes from her first major engagement. After Charles became king, she sat down and held the folder against her lap. The pages carried the confidence of a woman who had believed she had finally reached a secure place. When her private secretary entered, Camilla asked why the materials had been packed without warning, but her voice lacked the force she intended. The secretary apologized and explained that she had been reassigned to the Central Royal Office. Camilla reacted sharply, asking whether everyone had already accepted that her household was finished. The private aide lowered her eyes. Then the king's wife softened. She told the woman not to sacrifice her career for a decision made above them. Some employees had been offered new positions. Others would lose their contracts after a short transition. The limited period allowed for staff and responsibilities to move elsewhere. The title had vanished in one announcement, but dozens of lives were now breaking with it. Several charities received formal letters that morning. Camilla could continue supporting them personally. Yet, she no longer carried the authority, financial access, or national coordination once attached to her role. Each letter reduced years of public service to a carefully controlled private connection. Charles sent a handwritten note asking to see her. She read it once, then placed it beneath the official statement, without replying. At lunch, an attendant addressed Camilla as, "Your Music Majesty," stopped and corrected himself. She dismissed him gently. When the door closed, the former queen gripped the edge of the table until her hands stopped trembling.